become CEO and a group leader of the Abraaj Group?
Look, thank you for all of those wonderful words, and I actually think that we've reached a point where there's a watershed moment in the world's history. And we've reached a point where most of the systems of the past are not going to be the systems of the future. And I mean that literally in every sense of the word. I mean that when you think about the fact that most of the national borders that we are all so proud of and excited about in the world today are creations of the 20th century. Most of these lines, these straight lines that were drawn in deserts and plains, are a function of a post-colonial era. And yet, we're all extremely proud of our nationality and nationhood. We seem to be forgetting the origins of where we actually came from. Hundreds of generations of not having this nationhood and then being focused around this nationhood. And I don't mean to excite everyone to sort of jump up and say, down with the nation. I need you to be much more focused around the two other words that you used, which were Abuja and Kano, right? I think that we relate much more to the cities in which we live than the countries in which we live. Country happens to be a convenient identity, but the city is what defines us. And the world tomorrow is actually around urbanization. More than 50% of us globally live in cities today. It's the first time it's happened in human history. We're increasing that at the rate of 1 million people a week, which is 8 New York cities a year. That's a lot of people moving into cities. And they're not like you. They're young, they're empowered, they're excited, and they're going to shape that future that we see going forward. And why is it that we as Abraaj got excited about the Global Shapers? It's because, again, something else happened for the first time in human history, which is people under the age of 30, and let me be even more focused, people under the age of 27 and a half, okay, became extremely empowered. And how they became empowered is thanks to that instrument you're holding in your hand, which is a communication device, and in turn social media, which has led us to develop a sense of community in your generation that my generation does not possess. I grew up with a very clear sense of hierarchy and a respect for hierarchy. If I do X, I will keep climbing up to Y. Your generation actually, I have realized, doesn't think like that. You build an enormous level of networking support for yourselves across communities, across geographies, and much more into cities than we ever did in my world. And because of that, and because of the sense of community and this very healthy disregard for hierarchy, I actually think that the world you're going to shape is going to be radically different. And it's going to be different in terms of its societal interactions with each other. It's going to be different in terms of the way cities are structured. It's going to be different in terms of the products that are going to get innovated. Because again, the same device that you hold in your hands is going to give rise to arguably the greatest spurt in human innovation since the Industrial Revolution. And we haven't even begun to see the impact of technology on the world today. So for example, let me just think out of the box a little bit. All the medicines that we have in the world are designed and tested around white Anglo-Saxon males, not even females. And that formed the corpus group, if you like, of how the FDA tested medicine and approved it in the past. We all know that as human beings, our DNA is different, our genetic makeup is different, and these medicines that we take often harm us. What stops us in this world of big data, all of us wearing these little devices that we call Fitbits and so on that measure how much we walk and how fit we are, in a couple of years, if the cost of that is down to 1 cent, imagine 500 million Africans wearing this device, being able to beam data and information about themselves. And 5 years from now, somebody walking in a field outside Lagos, suddenly getting a phone call on the ubiquitous mobile, saying according to the data we have and everybody else around you, you're going to have a heart attack tomorrow afternoon at 11, so go to the hospital. You think that's crazy? It's not. We're close to it. We're there. And the innovation in that thinking is actually going to come from your generation, again, not from mine. So that's why we got involved with the Global Shapers. We got involved with the Global Shapers because, quite frankly, how am I going to make money? It's get into your head. I need to stay abreast, and my colleagues need to stay abreast of the thinking that drives you because across these growth markets globally, the average age is 26. In your country, the average age is 19. The future belongs to this youth. And if you think about what happens when people are 26, they spend. They spend on capex, they buy houses, they buy cars, they buy fridges. They spend on OPEX, they go to fancy restaurants, they buy good clothes, they do stuff like that. They spend, 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 with very little focus and worry about tomorrow. When you reach the age of 40, suddenly stop, you say, oh, something's not quite right here. Haven't saved enough money, you start saving. And the whole reality of the world today is the average age of the population in the OECD countries is 40. Okay? It's 26 in our world, it's 40 there, which means they're saving. When they save, they have to save on an absolute basis. And when they save on an absolute basis to generate returns, the only place they have to invest is right here, ladies and gentlemen. In Africa, in Asia, across large swatches of Latin America. This is where they're going to turn to make money. And they're going to turn to make money in these markets, which means there is a wall of money, a flood of money coming in your direction. And whether you're a banker, I know I said something rude about bankers earlier, we can't live with them, we can't live without them. But the reality is these bankers and this entire financial services industry is going to go through an explosion. And this money is going to need to find a home. And if you can create a Nigeria tomorrow that is driven by governance, that is driven by transparency, that is driven by doing things the right way, and that is focused on providing a healthy standard of living for all this young population coming forward. Because you're the guys in the middle, right? You're the global champions, you're that age. You're going to change the nature of your country, and you're going to make the capital looking for a home feel much more welcome in this environment. So that was a very, very long answer to why I enjoy my job. Okay, because I tend to get to think a lot about the issues that are facing our world today, and especially the markets in which we live. So as EJ said a little bit earlier, we don't call them emerging markets, we call them growth markets. Emerging markets is a little bit too patronizing, especially when it comes to China. It's emerging. It's leading the world economy. It's going to be the largest economy in the world in 5 years' time, and we still call it emerging markets. It's a bit daft, right? So it goes back to the heart of what I call acronym investing. What is BRICS? What is MINT? What is all this nonsense? Okay? Every place, every country, every region stands on its own resonance, on its own feet, and in its own opportunity. And why I'm here is because I genuinely believe, slightly controversially, that the two best markets left in the world that have a need for everything, from jeans to Coca-Cola to apple pie, right? And every little bit of infrastructure between the power segment need in this country, the healthcare segment need in this country, the education segment need in this country. I believe that this is one of the last two great opportunities left in the world. This is one and Iran is the other. And between these two markets, the quantum of investment that can be deployed actually can safely run into the hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. Which means all those poor retired pensioners out there are going to make a return thanks to the efforts that people like you are going to make. So that, in a nutshell, is our investment philosophy. We look at markets, we look at the main issues driving them, and we invest into where we see the opportunity. And why we support the global chambers, because you are the future. You are the people that we are going to have to interact with, both as consumers, as people that have created businesses that people like us can buy, and most importantly of all, when all of you are filthy rich, will be my investors. Okay? So might as well start a relationship really early, get to know each other, and we'll all have a very pleasant and happy life together. Why did I start Abraaj? Why am I in this job? I think a deep-seated discontent with the way things were going. I was living in Dubai. I didn't have any money at all, actually. And I came to the Middle East in 1990 at the height of the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. I moved to Saudi Arabia at that time. Actually, on the third day of the first Gulf War, I arrived in Saudi Arabia when everybody else was leaving. And to me, the opportunity was too good. Here was a nation in transition. Here was a region in transition. So I came there, I worked for a very large business group. I spent 3 years. Because everybody had left, I just happened to keep rising and rising. There was no one left to compete with me. know. And so I got into a very responsible position in a very large business group. And then one day I just got up and I felt, I should have been there for 7 years. I was there for 3 years. I got 4 years off for good behavior. I told my wife that we have enough money to educate our kids, who were very small at the time. She believed me. And I went to my boss and I said, I'm going to quit. He looked at me and he said, you're crazy. You can have any job in this group you want. Why would you want to quit? And I said, you can't give me the job I want. He bristled. And there's a guy who was the largest shareholder at the time in Chase Manhattan Bank, in Occidental Petroleum, in Credit Suisse First Boston. And he looked at me and he said, what do you mean I can't give you the job I want? I said, it's yours. Okay. So he totally understood the point I was making. He said, you go start off your own business. And I left and I went to Dubai. And again, if you don't tell anyone, the only reason Dubai is because my wife wanted to drive. She couldn't drive in Saudi Arabia. I know my wife's come up a couple of times, so important element of this. Be careful of that. And so I came to Dubai and started my business. And actually, with the grace of God, with a fair wind behind me, alhamdulillah, we grew and grew. And by the time I reached the year 2000, 6 years later, I was running a business that had 10,000 employees, that had an operation in 13 countries, and was doing close to $1 billion in turnover. I thought to myself, and this was the year 2000. I thought, how on earth did that happen, right? So I brought in McKinsey. What you do is even more irrelevant. The fact that you carry a stigma because you come from a world that is not dressed up on Wall Street is actually now a blessing to be carried, a sword to be carried. And that's what gave me the dignity and the pride to say, I can play your game as well as you can play your game, guys. And I can play it better. Okay? And that's how the firm started. And now, 10 years on, we manage $7.5 billion. We're the largest PE firm in the world operating in growth markets. I'm totally uninterested in investing in Europe and North America because if these are developing markets, those are submerged markets. And so the opportunity here is so staggering. So on a south-south basis today, the world's trade is much greater than with north-south. The fact that these markets have stood up and are capable of trade, are capable of dignity, is something that's crucially important, which is why I hate acronym investing. Please don't tell me that BRICS works or BRIC works. Nigeria has to stand on the fact that it has a story to tell that first must be embraced by Nigerians, by people of your generation, that have the willingness to stand up and say, proud to be Nigerian, step one. Second, I can change my country and my environment. And third, let me now let the rest of the world share the story. So that's how we built our business, going into country after country, talking to people like yourselves, getting local opportunity going. Because the other great thing about our markets is our local brands are better known than the foreign brands. We bought a business in Nigeria and Ghana 6 months ago, thanks to my friend over there in the back, Ravi Sharma, and that was called Fan Milk. It was the largest private equity deal done in sub-Saharan Africa outside of the resources sector and the telecom sector. We spent $400 million. It was a great deal. But we found that Fan Milk was a better recognized consumer brand in West Africa than Coca-Cola. How exciting, right? So if you keep finding these little jewels that are more exciting than Nestle and Kimberly-Clark and Colgate-Palmolive, the reality is our world has something to teach that world too, so long as we do it the right way. And so, apart from the investment activity, we're entirely focused on stakeholder engagement as a business. All our people are utterly obsessed with doing things sustainably in the right way, because if you run a sustainable business, if you buy a sustainable business, or if you turn a bad business into a sustainable business, that is good business. It leads to strong profit. I guarantee you that in X number of years' time, when you walk into a supermarket and you see 3 bottles of water lined up, all of them at the same price, the bottle you will pick will be the one that resonates with your sense of identity, with people that spend into their community, with people that believe in giving back into the environment that they come from. So we've adopted this as a business model from the day we started back in 2002. we started a program called ASSET, which is the Abraaj Stakeholder Engagement Track. And 5% of our top line, the model is called 555, 5% of our top line, or our bottom line, goes to stakeholder engagement and sustainable causes in the regions in which we operate. And what that means is on the 1st of January every year, the first 5% is a loss, as far as my colleagues are concerned. It's money already spent, so it makes them work harder. But it also makes them think, and that is why the second 5 comes in, which is 5 days of each person's time spent working in the community that they come from, and using their expertise and giving back into that environment. The third 5 was the hardest of all, which was to get people to voluntarily give up 5% of their bonuses into this pool. And trust me, in private equity, people earn a lot of money. Okay? And giving up 5% of that money is actually a real achievement. We're close to 70, and by the way, I don't know who gives and who doesn't give. It's an anonymous scheme, managed anonymously. And today, close to 70% of our people are doing that. And that, to me, is the real accomplishment of running our business. It means the culture has been internalized. People think about it, and they're willing to part with their own money and their own time to create a better environment that they live in. So it's not about investing. It's about creating a better world. That is why I say I don't think I'm a private equity firm. I still am totally confused as to who we are. I'm going to bring McKinsey in again and say, who are we? Right? I'm sure they'll find us an answer. But at the end of the day, we own 150 companies. These are very, very good companies around the world. If I can convince each of those companies, if I can infect them with my virus, if I can convince each of those companies to give away $1 million into the environment in which they come from, that's $150 million a year. I am not successful so far, but I'm going to get there. Because I'm a very determined person. And once we get there, imagine the scale of difference that private equity can bring in the ecosystem in which it operates. So I genuinely believe it's a force for good. I think it's because of that I was very, very fortunate. I'm very humble, but I'm extremely fortunate that the Secretary General chose me as being on the board of the Global Compact, which is the agency of the United Nations where the private sector interacts at the highest level. I'm forcing them to start thinking about the issues that we talk about. And I think together with the Global Shaper community, which I make it a point to meet, whether it's 5 people or 50 people, you are the future. Every city I go to, in January I was in 17 cities. I travel a lot. And every city I go to where there's a Shaper community, I like to meet with them. Because to me, this level of engagement with people like yourself, if you take away anything from the message that I'm giving you, it is work that little bit harder, a little bit smarter, and think through a little bit of what I'm saying. And if you pick up some of that, you'll change the world much more effectively than I can. Because your runway forward ahead of you is much longer than mine. And I'd be delighted to have been a part of that journey. So thank you for being here to start with, and I'd love to answer questions.
I'd like to bring it down to Nigeria this morning because we're all very young people. And I realized that...
So am I. The old people are not sitting around. That's the old folkies. EJ, stand up.
I realized that once you use a knowledge management platform called Opera to help your business OS model, and you have started investing in real estate in Nigeria. Now, as a country, we know that majority of our young, that's about 7 of our youth are quite unemployed. And we know that we don't have lives, we're facing a lot of challenges, and we have very good ideas, we have businesses we want to do. What advice, do you have tips that you think you can give us that will help us invest, like make our investments better?
Then I tell you that we're invested in, we're agnostic on sectors. These 150 companies cover just about everything you can imagine, from healthcare to education to logistics to infrastructure to power plants to consumer product companies and so on and so forth. When you're in private equity, you're like a bit like a kid in a candy store. You buy anything you want and turn it into an exciting opportunity. My colleagues in the West who run private equity firms like to portray themselves as alchemists, right? They put their hands inside a box and what comes out is base metal is now gold. They do that because they want to fool investors into thinking they're really smart people. I don't say that to investors. I say to investors, there's absolutely no difference between you and me. We're both practical business people. We're both people that understand commercial reality. The difference is I will invest your money safely with a focus on transparency and governance and risk aversion, and I will produce consistent returns. I will not hit the ball out of the park, even though we do, but I will get my runs, if you like, a run at a time, and as a result, our performance is in the top decile of private equity firms globally, because you're not out there trying to be a hero. So the first point that I wanted to make when you asked me the question, what tips, is don't be a hero. Just do things consistently with clarity, the same way that you've been taught, that you learned in school and through the experience of yourself and the people around you. Keep doing it consistently day after day, and the rewards will come. Second, I see so much opportunity in this country. I see almost every sector needing to do something. And then I also see a great big debate in government between one end of government asking another end of government, where did my money go? Right? What a great question. What an absolutely fabulous question. But then, when you think about it, this is a country that has some endemic issues that are associated with it too. How can I very, very calmly and boldly say things like that? It's because I come from a country that has exactly the same issues. I come from Pakistan. Okay? And God knows we have wrestled with corruption, lack of governance, and nepotism, and every conceivable negativity that you can imagine, and yet 200 million people live, survive, thrive, and continue to grow. So the point is, there is a momentum that is just caused by human development. There's another when one of you stands up, or someone out there stands up and says, enough is enough, now we're going to do things the right way. I don't think an individual can change that. I think society needs to wake up and say enough is enough. And when that happens, there will always be a medium that creates the opportunity for a country to shift time. I remember back in 1997, and none of you remember 1997, except fondly because you were running around in shorts and playing football. In 1997, there was the Asian crisis. If you had been around then, headline hysteria would have told you Turkey's collapsed, Mexico's collapsed, and because of those things outside of the Asian crisis, Thailand's collapsed, Malaysia's collapsed, Indonesia's collapsed, the whole world has collapsed. 5 years later, these countries were driving change. They were growing at 10 and 15% per annum. They had comprehensively changed their business model. They had understood what it meant to stare at the bottom of the well. So maybe sometimes you need to look at the bottom of the well to see how high the mountain is that you can climb. But all of these countries were a basket case. If you think that when you go into a restaurant in this country and pay for your food in wads of banknotes, okay, remember in Turkey, inflation as recently as 15 years ago was running at 2,500%. Okay? It was hyperinflation, and yet that country today is about to join the EU. Forget about the stuff you read in the headlines. Is one of the most vibrant consumer economies in the world, part of the G20. And yet, only 15 years ago, it was in a worse state than anything you can imagine here. So how do I see opportunity for you as Nigerians? Only up, only strong. But everybody has to collectively realize that the little business that you create, if you do it right, if you do it well, if you follow the basic principles of doing that, and not cut corners, then I think that can't be turned back. Again, look back to the internet bubble that burst in, was it 2001, 2002? By then you guys had stopped playing around football in shorts and you were holding hands with people you loved. And you now reached a point where the internet bubble burst. Who would have thought at that time? Everybody thought it's over, right? But the greatest innovation caused by the internet, the Yahoos, the Apples, the Amazons, and so on of the world, were an outcome of that collapse. Because it led to a level of discipline and thinking that is absolutely spectacular and has changed the world we live in today and has shaped the world we live in today. So every adversity and every challenge has a lesson in terms of how growth can happen and how opportunity can be created. So I don't know if I answered your question, but all I'm saying is optimism and doing things the right way and realizing that in this country you've got so much opportunity and it stares you in every direction. I'm an entrepreneur. Everywhere I turn, I see opportunity. The key is in execution.
Okay, at this point in time, I'll open up for questions.
I'm a member of the Career Shapers, and I'm an IT professional. I'm an alumni of the University of Leicester, and I'm a banker also. So I think that's a little about me. I work in a bank, that's it. My question is this. Growing up, they always give us the importance of studying, and then after you study, mostly it's getting a good job, settling, having a good family, and all that. So there's always this point where you have a good idea, but you're always afraid of when to quit or when to actually move into a business. Because the idea is if you have a good job, you have a content, you should have contentment, and you should have that kind of living. Like in your story, you mentioned to us like at the point you quit your job. What will you tell young people like us that maybe you're working or you have something that you're actually afraid to take the first step? That's fine.
I think it's a great question, actually. Because, the first part of what you asked about when we're growing up, we study and we are promised if we do well, we'll get a job, right? Well, my generation is the first generation that actually broke its promise to your generation. I don't know if any of you have noticed that. We are the people that told our kids, go to university, go to school, study hard, and we promise you will have a better life compared to us. The level of graduate unemployment in the world today is higher than it's ever been. Maybe it's not so bad here, but it is enormously bad in parts of Europe, in parts of the world where these things matter. Okay? Those people actually have very, very little choices. When you look at Spain, when you look at Portugal, when you look at Tunisia, they have very, very little choices because over the course of the last 50 years, post-war Europe has reconciled itself from being an innovating continent to being a service-providing continent. Most people became lawyers or bankers or architects or, X, Y, Z. That's not to say any of that is wrong, but what it became was a service provider to the rest of the world. Today, more than ever before, entrepreneurship and innovation is the name of the game. When people don't have jobs, they can't stay hungry, they have to do something. You're in the fortunate position of having a job and being able to decide whether or not you should do your own thing. The only thing I know about doing your own thing is it comes from deep within yourself. You will know exactly when the right time is. Nobody can tell you when the right time is. And there is a risk-reward trade-off which is massive. I sit in a comfortable job. I have 2 young kids. I have a great life. And is this a point at which I should take a risk? I did. Because I had an inherent sense of faith in the fact that I had a toolkit, I had professional qualifications. If it didn't work out, I could have gone back. My life is a work in progress. I don't know if it worked out or not. Okay. But you know what? Maybe I'll go back and work somewhere in a job for someone. But the reality of what I'm trying to say is the only person who knows it's the right time is you. So when you take that risk, it is going to be with an incredible sense of self-confidence. That I can make it on my own, I can do it better than anyone else. And it may be that with your background in IT, with being an alumni at the University of Leicester, and a current job as a banker, you may decide to start an ice cream store. Because whatever you start, the point I was making was, whatever you start has to come from passion and conviction of what you think is the right thing. And it will come, it will happen. I can't tell you that at age 32 and a half, this is what you're going to do. You're going to do it when you're ready for it.
I also run an NGO called AfriMind, which discusses and shapes African policy. The question I have for you is, I found it very amazing that you started the company with what I heard was $50,000 in savings. And then 5 years later, you were buying a company worth $160 million. And so my question is, in those 5 years, how did you grow rapidly from 50,000 to 160 million?
So I have a question. I started my company in 2010. So the last 3 years running the company, biggest challenge that I face is finding the right people to work with. And it's actually in 2 parts, partnerships and employees. So in your experience, sometimes, for example, I have an engineering background, I finished from the Imperial College management. Right? So I just start sometimes if I work, on a product, if you want to come, going to partnership with me, and sometimes it always ends up with a problem. Then you just have to close out something, right? Then secondly, when I hire people, sometimes after 3 months I'm hiring. So in your experience, what are the things that you look at when you're going to partnership with somebody, or when you're hiring somebody?
So I started with actually $75,000. Although I used 25 of that to rent a house in a really nice place and bought a dog and so on and so forth. I started and I was very lucky in that when I left the Abraaj Group, which is where I used to work, I was a very important guy there. I was head of business development. I had risen up fairly vertically through the ranks. And I could tell you a lot about the stories of what actually happened in that period, but it was around opportunity. Creating opportunity, working for someone else, building businesses, and realizing the value of networking. Then when I left and I started my own business, I was lucky that I got some contracts. Half the people in my diary and this is before the days of, having that thing on you. So you see these little Casio communicators. And half the people in my database didn't return my call. They only knew me because of the job I had. The other half were good people. And so I built up very quickly a consulting business of advising people on how to do business in Saudi Arabia and the region. My big break came thanks to bankers. There was a firm called Kidder Peabody, and they were trying to raise money for what at the time was a very, very innovative product, which is you don't buy duty-free on planes, you buy it at either destination or before. Much of what has happened in the world today. And I raised $5 or $6 million for them. And I made, as a result, because nobody else was going to help them raise money, I made 10% of that capital. So I made that, and within my first year of working, I actually made $1 million. Okay, believe it or not. And I was faced with the reality: should I continue playing this game, which is very exciting, very lucrative, and just work with myself, my dog, and 2 assistants, right? And keep making this money and getting rich, or should I invest all of it back into building a team and creating a business? So I came to the conclusion the thing to do is to build a team and create a business. So I went out and I hired people, I brought them on, and I figured let me get into project development and start to see how I can do that. Limited success, much more limited than the first time around. But I was out there building projects, going slowly, raising money, etc. Until in the summer of 1997, I was on my way to the US for a holiday, and I stopped in London, and a friend of mine told me, about the fact that Inchcape, which was this big global conglomerate, is selling all its businesses because it wants to get out of everything non-core and focus on automotive. And Inchcape had a massive business in the Middle East. So he said, would you be interested in looking at that? I thought we must be nuts, but because I gave a picture that was slightly more prosperous than I actually was, I said, I'll go along and meet them. Okay? So I went and met them. And when I heard the story, this was all in businesses that I understood intrinsically. I'd spent the previous 7-8 years building consumer brands, building consumer businesses. I was responsible for taking Burger King into the Middle East. I was responsible for bringing Hertz into the Middle East. I'd helped build those businesses. So I knew what consumer brands were all about. So I stuck my hand up and I said, I want to be a part of the bidding process. And Inchcape said to me, there are already 16 bidders. You can be the 17th, but you need to provide proof of funds that you have $150 million that are necessary to do this deal. Of course, I didn't have 5, right? So I went along to ANZ Brindley's Bank, and you have to remember in 1997, there was not a lot of M&A activity going on across the world. So I went to ANZ Brindley's, who I knew well, and I said to them, I'll bring you this deal, I'll make it work, I'll work it, I'll find the equity, will you provide the debt? They studied it for 3 or 4 days, they said, if you can provide 75 million in equity, we'll provide 75 million in debt. So I was in business. I knew that this reality had legs. I went back to Inchcape. I said, let's start talking. And they said, well, we need to get you into the data room. I had 9 employees at the time in Dubai. I flew them all to London. All of us stayed in my 2-bedroom apartment. I'm not kidding. That's exactly how this business was built. and we spent the next 3 months doing due diligence on the Inchcape transaction. We did. And the difference between us and all the other bidders was every time in the data room, they asked us for information or, posed us with a question, we'd answer immediately. Everybody else had to go back to their boards, had to go back to their leaders, had to go back to X, Y, and Z. Over the course of those 4 months, we got into pole position. We still didn't have the money. Okay? And we got to a point where, when we reached January of 1999, we were at a point where we could do this deal, but we still needed to find the capital. So at that point, I went back to the region and I asked my friends there to participate in something which I invented called cumulative renewable preference shares with a fixed time value. I don't know what it meant, but it sounded good. That's exactly what we called it. And we raised a few $1 million around that. So again, debt on debt. All right? And we went back into Inchcape. And we agreed a deal with them where we had to pay a segment of that later and a segment immediately. We did the deal. We bought the business. And immediately, the day after we bought it, it was a combination of many businesses. The day after we bought it, our local partner in Dubai, of all places, who was managing a brand called Spinneys, turned around and cancelled our agreement and said, "Done, I'm not doing this deal anymore with anybody. I'm taking back my share of the business." Of course, at that point, the component of, and I know I'm boring you, but it's important, $18 million was the component of that company in the overall deal. So when they cancelled that, I went back to Inchcape and I said, the deal's off. They'd already announced it in the stock market. They felt a lot of embarrassment. They said, what will it take you to do this deal now that this is off the table? So I told them, you need to give me a price reduction of $30 million. So now the price came down to 120. I went back to Dubai and I went to see our local partner, this guy called Ali Bawardi. And I said to Ali, I knew that our segment of that company was 18 million. I said to Ali, if I sell you this business, what will you buy it for rather than get into a war? He said 30 million. He didn't know I only paid 18. Right? And that is how we bought this company. The differential $12 million that he had given gave us the equity share to go in alongside our own capital, and that's how we bought this company. We bought a $150 million business with $5 million of equity. Everything else was structured. On that $5 million of equity over the course of the next 3 years, I sold off all the non-core businesses that we had, one of which was a very large alcohol business. I didn't want to trade in alcohol. I sold it, and by selling it on day one, what happened was that the amount of money I raised out of that, I paid off all the rent. So now I was left with a free business, free of debt. And my next year and a half was spent in selling off the non-core businesses. So my $5 million in equity, I generated $120 million of profit. That's how I made my money. Thank you.
Hello once again, my name is Samuel Tonga.
Don't tell anyone in the world, right?
My name is Samuel Tonga. I'm the curator of the Cullen Hall. I'm a journalist, also a freelance reporter. Deeply I have two questions. The first one is, I'm sure the Abraaj Group story is not all rosy. Sure, there's challenges facing the extremely little. There's challenges and obstacles that challenges the So I'd like you to share with us some of them. And the second part of the question is, what's the name of that book? Thank you.
So, you're absolutely right. Challenges galore. Okay. What I didn't tell you is the story that I just told you was the most stressful period of my life. 2 years getting through this process, not knowing where the money is going to come from tomorrow, not knowing where the opportunity is that is going to lead to further development of this business. Right? So that's step one. No shortage of challenges. You asked about luck. I don't know who it was who said the harder I work, the luckier I get. This is not about luck. This is about knowing what it is that you want to do, and most important of all, avoiding the pitfalls. We've lost money. But the interesting thing is, third-party audited, our total losses across the $7.5 billion, $4.5 billion returned to investors, 150 companies in the portfolio, 210 in total in terms of being acquired. Total loss ratio 2%. 2%. That's not to say that we're smart or lucky. It says we're careful. It says we're focused on risk. We understand risk. And if you remember what I said at the start, it's not about hitting the ball out of the park. When you're ready to hit the ball out of the park, your level of risk capacity and risk-taking desire also goes up exponentially. Stick to doing things consistently. So what do I tell my colleagues? I say, I don't want to be the guy who lands up making the top 25% in a transaction. Let somebody else make it. I don't want to be the guy who's left holding the baby and the bathwater in the bottom 25%. Let's focus on that middle 50%. And if we come in at the bottom of that and exit at the top of that, we'd have made 3 times our capital. Right? That's the game we're in. That's the business we're in. Have we lost money? Yes, part of that 2%. It was because we read people wrong. In one case, we were involved in hubris investing. We were so focused on wanting to make the investment, we forgot to verify that our partner that we were buying into was actually a crook. Okay? We lost all the money there to fraud. In 2 other cases, also hubris investments, we got into luxury yacht manufacturing. Why on earth would you want to get into luxury yacht manufacturing? But the fact that we faced up to that reality, we went back to our investors and told them that this is what happened, right? And we focused on the fact that when we did these investments, we learned our lessons and made sure we wouldn't make those mistakes again. In a $7.5 billion portfolio, you could say that losing $70 or $80 million is not a big deal. Every dollar we lose or have ever lost is a big deal. So when you remain focused on it, they've been internalized, and I hope that we remain lucky, as we said, because the last thing in the world anyone wants is a co-op.
I was asking about the dog. Okay, we'll take one more question, and okay, take one.
Hi, hello. My name is Anis Yazid. I'm an entrepreneur in Kano. I'm the founder of Certis Nigeria Limited.
Starting off what?
Certis Nigeria Limited. That's the name of my company.
And what do you do?
I'm into information technology and work
In Kano.
in Kano. So I have a question. I started my company in 2010. So the last 3 years that I'm running the company, I face the biggest challenge that I face is finding the right people to work with. It's actually in 2 parts. Partnerships and employees. So in your experience, sometimes, for example, I have an engineering background, I finished from Imperial College in environmental engineering. So I get stuck sometimes if I work, on a product that I believe in, people want to come go into partnership with me. And sometimes it always ends up, from, then just like to close out something like that. Then secondly, when I hire people, sometimes after 3 months I fire them. So your experience, what are the things that you look at when you're going to partnership with somebody, or when you're hiring somebody? How you get this?
Okay, look, partnership is a crucial thing. Because when you go into partnership with someone, either on the basis of capital or effort, you have to be very, very focused on what each party wants out of that partnership. Any partnership that is unequal in terms of desire is also unequal in terms of outcome. If somebody wants that partnership more than you want that partnership, if their objectives on that partnership are different from the objectives that you have in that partnership, it will lead to an unequal outcome, and therefore it may not end well. I think whenever anybody goes into a partnership, you have to measure very carefully and clearly what is it that you want, what is it that the other party wants, and can you reach that platform on the basis of equality and mutual self-respect. Now, you could do a partnership today with Shell, which is a global giant, but you will hear what I'm saying actually in the Shell annual report, which is that is a business that treats every relationship it enters into on the basis of equality. It's these sorts of things that make great companies greater, okay, and regional companies into global companies. The level of respect with which you deal with your counterparties. Coming to employees, right? That's a massive area of discord, because in a small company, much more than in a large company, you can never afford to make a mistake. Now, when I started, I actually have to tell you, nobody would come work for me, right? Because here was a guy who didn't have any money and was starting a business and didn't even know what he wanted to do. So that doesn't make for a good business plan. And so I turned to people I knew. I turned to people that I had known in the course of growing up through life, watching their careers in different places. And I tapped into their pain and their discontent of wanting to be entrepreneurs as well. And so I said, come join this journey with me. And by the way, I gave away large chunks of equity. Alright? So to me, it is better to own 20% of something worth 100 than 100% of something worth 2. Right? So I was very comfortable giving away equity and bringing in like-minded people that were capable of working as hard as I was working and had the bandwidth to understand where we were going and had the unquestioned capacity to treat me as their leader. Right? Because I was in charge, I was the boss. Right? And so we went down that merry road together. And over time, I'm fortunate in that I don't recruit anybody anymore. My colleagues do it for me. But when they make the mistake of sending someone to me, I always, in the course of an interview, ask the question, right? What sport did you play at school? It's an innocent question. People think I'm asking it out of fun, right? But the answer tells me everything I want to know about the person. Because if you played football or cricket or a team sport, you will remain a team player. If you did play individual sport, tennis, for example, you will be an outstanding achiever in life, but you'll be focused on winning your way. Now you may think I'm generalizing, but actually statistically what I've found in people that I've worked with is that holds true as they go through life. The one answer I will not accept is I didn't play sport. Because if you didn't play sport, you didn't have a life, go home.